to have with us. This is kind of odd. Jenna Pogorels from the Alzheimer's Association in Duluth. She is amazing. They are an amazing organization, partnered with us in so many ways. We are so grateful for them. We have lots of literature of care partners about Alzheimer's and related dementias that we've gotten from them. If you are interested in knowing more, please talk to me, and I'm glad to get you that info. But they are amazing, and Jenna is amazing. And we thank you so much, Jenna, for being here. However, I acknowledge you.
Well, thank you so much. And I would love to be there in person with you all. And typically I would be, but our family is moving tomorrow. We close on a new house. And so, as you all know, probably from moving in the past, it's a bit chaotic. So I'm grateful to be here for a short bit for packing break. So thank you for having me today. This class is really focused on the basics of Alzheimer's and dementia, and it really does drill down to the questions that we commonly see around risk factors and stages of the disease process. And also it's going to talk a little bit about some of our fun research that's coming out and exciting research around things that are happening in the world of Alzheimer's and dementia. So these are, hope you leave today with some of this information. Certainly we'll talk about the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, recognize how it goes through the brain and why there's certain things that we need to change, like our communication, like our ways that we might interact with folks living with dementia. There's reasons, and it's because how the disease is affecting the brain. We'll talk a little bit about those risk factors and the stages as well as what's happening in research. And then I do want to just share some resources that we do have available. And certainly, as Christy mentioned, we have a fantastic partnership and lots of events happening around Grand Marais, and just want to make sure that y'all are aware of those. All right. So we'll jump in here. Sorry, the screen sometimes moves a bit slow, so I'm going to try and catch it a little bit, but we always like to test our audience on things. And so I may not, just because we're in a different location, so I might just pop in and give the answers myself, but I will certainly allow you to take a look at what we're dealing with. And I will say, this is a slightly outdated education awareness program because we just got new stats out in April or May. So we haven't quite updated our scenes here yet, but we always want to make sure folks know how many are currently living with Alzheimer's disease in the United States, and is actually a little over 7 million now. So this was our 2024 stats. We're going into our 2025 stats that came out in April. And so we're looking at a little more than 7 million, which we did increase, which we were expecting to increase, and we expect to increase up through 2050 as well, unless we have a change in course of action here, of course. So this is more than about 7 million are living with Alzheimer's disease in the United States. Due to that we know that those folks living with Alzheimer's have caregivers. And so we want to make sure that we give recognition to those informal caregivers and those passionate people who are caring for those people with dementia. Currently, right now in the United States, we have about 12 million actually that are reflective of the increase of the number of individuals. We actually have around 12 million that are caring for people. And again, these are unpaid. So these are not those paid home care workers or those folks who might be in an assisted living or memory care. These are folks that are friends, family members, come doing to unpaid care for our folks living with dementia. So this video is our 2024 facts and figures. I'm going to play it. Again, slight changes for 2025, not a lot of changes. So this is very relevant still to kind of the representative of the association right now. if you are interested in getting the 2025 facts and figures, there is a short video that you can go onto the website that it listed before, which is just alz.org/facts. They have facts and figures for every state out there. So if you're looking specifically for Minnesota, we have around 110,000, I believe it's 110,000 right now living in Minnesota with Alzheimer's disease. I don't have my sheet right in front of me, but I believe it's about 110,000 right now. So we do see that increasing, and so we are taking those measures, like I said, to really grow on that risk reduction, but also early detection. There's some really great new medications out that we'll chat about, and so we'll be talking a little bit more about that. Alrighty, so I'm going to go into a little bit of more information around the actual Alzheimer's and dementia. What's the difference? Probably the number one question that we get. So here's a 50-50, but I'm gonna give it to us. So Alzheimer's is not a normal part of the aging process. It is a brain disease that causes problems with memory, thinking, and behavior. There are some pieces that obviously is related to age. We did see the statistics of 1 in 10 over the age of 65 are living with Alzheimer's. That does jump to 1 in 3 when we hit the age of 85. So it is a significant risk factor is age, but it's not part of the normal aging process. It is part of the normal aging process to have our brain slow down a little bit. And I know I've done, I think, our 10 warning signs class with this group before, but if you're interested in learning more, again, around early detection and the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's and dementia, feel free to hop onto our website. All of our classes, including this one, are free to watch at your leisure. So I encourage you to take a look at those if you're interested as well. Oh boy, we're just full of the questions today. So unfortunately true that people under the age of 65 can get Alzheimer's disease. We in the association call this younger onset. You may hear it referred to as early onset as well. At times I tend to refer to it as younger onset just because early onset often gets misconstrued as being in the early stages too. So just to kind of delineate between the factors there, I consider younger onset to be those who are under the age of 65 when they are diagnosed. Typical age range for diagnosis is in the 70s and 80s, though. That's when we see the bulk of the diagnoses come through. So the next video is going to be our expert, Dr. Snyder, who's going to jump on and share a little bit more information on the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, and then we'll dig in a little bit more from that.
Dementia is the umbrella term for an individual's changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. There are many possible causes of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the most common cause. Other causes of dementia are vascular dementia, which is marked by changes in the blood flow in the blood vessels in the brain. Dementia with Lewy bodies, identified by specific brain changes throughout the brain that include the buildup of a protein known as alpha-synuclein. And frontal temporal dementia, which is marked by brain cell loss in the front sections of the brain or the frontal lobe. Each type of dementia may have distinct characteristics to cause specific behaviors in the individual, but there is also some overlap in behaviors among the types of dementia.
So I just want to call out a few of those different dementias that Dr. Snyder was talking about. So again, dementia in itself is that kind of overall arching terminology that we provide to explain a change in cognitive or thinking skills. So something's going on that declines that person's thinking skills. As Dr. Snyder mentioned, Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia. About 50 to 70% of individuals who live with dementia is due to Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease starts in our hippocampus, which is our short-term memory bank. So if you've ever known someone living with Alzheimer's and you've heard repetitive stories or repetitive questions, the reason behind that is a brand new question or a brand new story to them because the hippocampus part, again, is that short-term memory. So they have a really difficult time remembering things that happened 30 seconds ago, sometimes 5 minutes ago, or this morning, yesterday, last week. So those are short-term memories that we have. Now, they may have really great recall of their long-term memories. So things of when they were a child, things when they were graduating from high school, getting married, raising their own children. Those are some of our more longer term memories. Those memories may start to fade as well, but typically later in the disease process. So we'd be looking more towards those middle to later stages where we might see some long-term memory changes as well. In the beginning, though, we most commonly see changes in short-term memory. So the greatest known risk factor is age, and it is progressive, and we'll talk a little bit about what those stages look like. I just want to kind of call out some of the other kinds of dementia or forms of dementia that we see commonly at the Alzheimer's Association and you may be familiar with, but dementia with Lewy bodies is one of those that we often see or get questions about. Very similar to Alzheimer's disease in sense of the progression, but it is a little different in terms of the different protein that causes it. In Alzheimer's disease, it is our alpha beta protein and our tau tangles that is causing some of the hallmark of Alzheimer's. In Lewy body, it is the alpha-synuclein protein, which is just another component in the brain that we have. And there are a few key factors early on for folks living with dementia with Lewy bodies. One of the hallmarks that we typically will see, not for everybody, but for some, is that for folks living with Lewy body type dementia, they have a rigidity in movement that is very similar to Parkinson's. So oftentimes it may be misdiagnosed or maybe diagnosed along with Parkinson's, or there might be some further testing to see whether or not it's Parkinson's versus Lewy body, because there's some movement issues that are very similar. These folks also, early on, one of their first symptoms they may have is visual hallucinations, oftentimes seeing small people, so children, animals, not necessarily disturbing hallucinations, but very much they may be aware that there are hallucinations. They're just not sure. So they'll, kind of look at the partner next to them and say, "Hey, do you see that person in this room?" And their partner might say, "No, I don't see anyone there." And then "Oh, okay, I know I'm having a hallucination." So it's not always disturbing, but it can certainly be disturbing for people at times to have hallucinations. Now, certainly we see also hallucinations with folks with Alzheimer's disease. However, we tend to see those pop up later in the progression, so more of the middle to later stages of Alzheimer's. Just want to mention too that folks living with Down syndrome who have a diagnosis of Down syndrome also are at a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. The alpha beta protein is the one that is created on chromosome 21. So we do know that since we have an extra copy of that chromosome, we have extra beta protein in there. And so we do know that I want to say last time I checked the stats, it was about 50% of individuals with Down syndrome by the age of 50 will be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. So there is a significant risk factor for those individuals, and more research is being done with that as well. Dr. Snyder mentioned frontal temporal dementia. You sometimes might hear it as FTD. Way back in the day, you might have heard it as Pick's disease. Frontal temporal dementia has two variants, one being a behavior variant, which can be kind of almost a flip of a switch of change in behavior, almost a 180 switch for some individuals. So they may become more obsessive compulsive. They may become more agitated easily, frustrated easily, anger more easily than they have in the past. These folks may also become hypersexualized, so they start to watch pornography a lot at times. We hear that quite a bit. They start to use curse words and swearing more often than they ever had before. So it's a huge change in behavioral kind of piece of it. The other variant of frontal temporal dementia is primary progressive aphasia, or sometimes known as PPA. And this really is a change in communication, both receptively, so what they're taking in and understanding in communication, but also expressively, so what they're able to put out. If you may remember a few years ago when Bruce Willis's family kind of came out and said he was experiencing aphasia, which is a change in communication, and then came back a little bit later on and said that he had a form of FTD. He was the primary progressive aphasia that he was living with. So And there, it kind of came into fruition a little bit more into the public eye at that point, but it has been around for quite some time. The unique parts of frontal temporal dementia is that we tend to see this be diagnosed earlier in folks. So where we might see Alzheimer's typically in the 70s and 80s, we are seeing folks with frontal temporal dementia typically in their 40s and to 50s and 60s, early 60s. So quite young. A lot of times these folks are still raising their children. They are not necessarily fitting in well with the memory care or the assisted living side of things. So it can be really challenging for family members who are caring for someone with frontal temporal dementia to find appropriate resources, to find appropriate support for that. Frontal temporal degeneration is also inherited in about a third of the cases. So not all cases, but about a third of them. Also just want to mention vascular dementia. So vascular dementia is common amongst those who have had a history of heart disease, cardiovascular issues, history of stroke, things like that occurs when we have blood vessel blockage leading to strokes or bleeding in the brain. So what's unique about vascular dementia, very similar to Alzheimer's disease, and oftentimes they are diagnosed together, and we would call that a mixed dementia when we see kind of symptoms from two different types of dementia. And oftentimes we will see vascular and Alzheimer's disease together, and they have very similar risk factors, and that's part of the reason. The main difference, however, is in the progression of this vascular dementia versus Alzheimer's disease. For someone with vascular dementia, they may have a cognitive level that's kind of at one point, and then they may have a stroke or a TIA and that kind of drops. Then it's going to plateau for a bit. So it's going to seem like everything is fine. Nothing, nothing's really impacting them. It's not getting worse. It's just kind of plateaued. If again, that person has another stroke or some sort of incident where their cognitive features or their thinking skills drop again, it's going to plateau. So it ends up being almost like a stair-step progression versus with Alzheimer's disease, which we see that gradual decline of their cognitive abilities. So for some folks with vascular dementia have very good memory, and that's because it may not have impacted their hippocampus like it does for Alzheimer's disease. So there are instances where these folks might have other symptoms of dementia, such as impaired judgment, planning and organizing, communication, as opposed to that memory loss that we typically see early on with Alzheimer's disease. I'm sure folks have questions, and so I know we were going to take questions at the end, so I'm just going to go through some of these, and certainly add your questions to the chat, or we'll chat with them at the end as well. There's a lot of information going to be shared here. And the only other one I think I will just share, because I get some questions about it, is Parkinson's, of course. And so Parkinson's is another form of dementia. Not everyone who has Parkinson's will develop the Parkinsonian dementia. Some stay at that other symptoms. But there is a Parkinsonian type dementia that is a decline in thinking and reasoning that develops usually later in the disease process for Parkinson's. Early on, we might see more of those movement issues and things like that we associate, the shaking and things like that we associate with Parkinson's. And then we may see later on some of those cognitive features that are including ability to pay attention, memory, and some of those other cognitive features. So all this information is in brochures that we have. I think I shared those with Christy as well. They're on our website. So if you do want more information on the different types of dementias, this is not even an exhaustive list. There's lots more out there. Please feel free to take a look and go through and take a look and see what any questions that you do have. Feel free to take a look and give us a call or chat us up if you have questions about them. All right, so let's get into this is just a recap of what we kind of just chatted about. But I want to get a little bit into how it's working in the brain here. I shared a little bit already, but we'll get more in depth here. So another video here that will talk a little bit about what's happening into the brain process.
More than 100 years ago, Dr. Alzheimer described specific changes in the brain, what we now call the formation of plaques and tangles. Alzheimer's is a progressive brain disease that's marked by these key changes and impacts memory, thinking, and behavior. The brain has three main parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. Each one plays a role in how the body functions. Alzheimer's disease causes nerve cells to die, which leads to brain tissue loss and causes loss of function and communication between cells. These changes can cause the symptoms of Alzheimer's, such as memory loss, behavioral issues, problems with thinking, planning, and at the end stage, swallowing.
So just want to reiterate what Dr. Carrillo was talking about. So again, Alzheimer's disease will start in the hippocampus area, kind of move into our temporal or parietal lobes and really impact the communication, organizing, planning, pieces like that. And then it'll move to the frontal temporal part of our brain where we might see some of those changes in terms of what we see with frontal temporal dementia, especially around emotion regulation, pieces like that. If you've ever known someone who just says what's on their head and their brain and doesn't filter, that filter is found in our frontal temporal part of our brain. So very commonly, this is being impacted when we have someone who might just not have that filter to what they say or the social appropriateness piece. Alzheimer's will then move back and towards our occipital lobe and down into our brain stem. This is where it becomes a fatal disease because once it hits that brain stem, the brain stem is the one that really controls some of our functioning organs. And so that's where we start seeing those changes in breathing. As Dr. Creo mentioned, we see those changes in swallowing. So if you've ever known someone in those later stages of Alzheimer's disease, you'll notice they have a change in swallowing and they may need support with a different dietary need or anything like that. A lot of times those folks might have some aspiration or things like that pop up as well. So it becomes really difficult to eat and or drink and get folks to be able to do that. So lots of changes that happen throughout the brain. And it's going to be different for everybody in terms of the length of time that it takes someone to go through the journey. I know that's one question we get quite often, and it's always a hard answer because it's very individualized. That's one of the tough parts of dementia and Alzheimer's disease is something that would be, something that would be common for someone else, maybe not be a common symptom for that next person down the road. And we're going to have different ways that treat and intervene and connect with those individuals too. All right, we're going to jump into a little bit of the risk factors. I know I've shared a little bit about them already, but we'll talk a little bit more. I know this one I believe was already given out. So the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's disease at this point is age. So we all are aging. We all have that risk factor going up for us. And so as I mentioned before, after age 65, the risk of Alzheimer's doubles every 5 years. And then 34% of people aged 85 and older have Alzheimer's disease at this point. There's other factors and risk factors as well. So I believe the next video we'll have Dr. Snyder talking a little bit more about that, and then we'll dig into that a little bit too.
Alzheimer's disease is marked by specific brain changes that result in the clinical changes in individual experiences. That is, changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. And ultimately, Alzheimer's is fatal. The exact cause for these changes is unknown, but there are some hints as to what may contribute to an individual's risk. Age is the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's, and when we look at populations of people, we see an increased risk over the age of 65. However, Alzheimer's is not normal aging. Family history is also a known risk factor. Research has shown that those who have a parent or a sibling with Alzheimer's are more likely to develop the disease, and that risk increases if more than one family member has Alzheimer's. When we talk about the genes involved in Alzheimer's, there are two categories that could potentially be involved: risk genes and deterministic genes. Risk genes increases an individual's risk for developing the disease, but does not guarantee that they will develop Alzheimer's. Deterministic genes, which are rare for Alzheimer's, guarantee that the person will develop the disease.
So again, I just want to clarify those genetic factors because we get a lot of questions on that. But the deterministic genes, as Dr. Snyder mentioned, very rare. Less than 1% of individuals with Alzheimer's have the genetic form. We typically see it with those with younger onset. So if we see those under the age of 65, even as young as 50, that we typically will see a first-degree relative, so parent, a sibling who's also been diagnosed with younger onset. I always give the example, our chapter is Minnesota-North Dakota, and we were working with a family in North Dakota that had 6 siblings in their family group, and I believe that one of their parents had been diagnosed with younger onset, and so the siblings, all 6 of them, had decided to get the genetic test done, and 5 of them came back positive for the gene, and one did not. And she ended up being her 5 siblings' caregivers. They were all diagnosed with Alzheimer's by, I believe, the age 50 or 55. All of them had been diagnosed. And so she became their caregiver, and they have all since passed, but she still shares her story with her family's story and everything. So it is fairly rare to see that, and we typically, again, will see that in a familial group of individuals under the age of 65. For the risk genes, we all have a gene that we get from mom and dad, the APOE4 gene or APOE gene. There's a 2, 3, and a 4 version. So we have chances of getting a 2, 3, or 4 from one from mom and one from dad. And so what happens is if we have APOE4, if we get 2 4s, so we get a 4 from mom and we get a 4 from dad, that increases our risk factor. So the APOE4 is our risk gene that we talk about. It does not guarantee that that individual will be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, but it does increase the risk. As Dr. Snyder mentioned, we often hear in the questions around family history, or people will come up and say, well, I feel like I'm going to get it because my grandma had it and my great aunts had it, or whomever. And there is some risk factor, certainly, for familial history. One of the things that we look at is again, just looking at first-degree relatives, so parent or sibling groups that are receiving this. So I can give the example. My grandfather had dementia. My mom's risk factor went up when he was diagnosed because that is her dad. If my mom were to have or be diagnosed, then my risk factor would go up. But at this point, my risk factor, went up slightly with my grandfather. But because he's not my first-degree relative, my mom is, didn't go up as much as her risk factor went up. The more relatives that we see, first-degree relatives, so if we had mom and dad that were diagnosed, we have a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's due to that. If we had mom, dad, and siblings, again, our risk factor is going to go up for that. There are a few populations that we see at higher risk, including Black Americans, African Americans. There are that are more likely as their white counterparts to have Alzheimer's or another dementia. Hispanic Americans, Latinos, about 1.5 times likely. We also know that Native Americans, Indigenous individuals are also at a higher target to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and almost 2/3 of Americans living with Alzheimer's are women. Lots of research still happening with that. Part of that is, again, the primary risk factor is age. Currently, women tend to live a bit longer than men, so we do see that women hit that age of onset. We are able to get to the 70s and 80s more often than the men who may be dying of cardiovascular issues or things like that we typically see. And so that certainly could play a role in some of that. But there's also research happening around, is there any hormonal or other biological features that can be accounted for as well? So nothing truly definite yet, but still in the works in terms of populations at higher risk. All right, just a recap here of what we just chatted about in terms of the risk factors. We're going to jump into a little bit about the staging of Alzheimer's disease. So I want to just take a moment here and share some videos. At the Alzheimer's Association, we are fortunate to have individuals living with Alzheimer's in those early stages be a part of an early stage advisory board for us at both the national and local level. And these individuals are sharing their stories. They're also guiding all of our work and programs to really make sure that their needs are met and that we are staying true to the individuals who are impacted by Alzheimer's disease. So these 3 videos are individuals that at the time when they were videoed were in those early stages. They have all since moved and progressed, but in these videos they shared their stories. Some of them share a little bit about what first signs they saw, how the changes they noticed in their life. And so I'm going to share just a little bit of what does living with Alzheimer's feel like from the perspective of these 3. I believe one of them has Lewy body dementia as well. So 2 are living with Alzheimer's and the third one is living with Lewy body. So I'll just play these here so we get a little snippet of what it's like from their own words.
Math, I can't do a simple tip anymore. You know, I sit there, I stare at it. It's crazy what numbers I can't deal with anymore. And in some ways, that's the disease to me. The other thing that I've increasingly been struggling with are words, which I've dealt with words my entire life. You know, as an avid reader, as a reporter, as a writer. I struggle with them now.
So one of the symptoms, of course, is a change in communication. We saw that with that gentleman the pause in the conversation, very common in those early stages to have someone come into a conversation and then just have that pause and not be able to think of that word and not be able to recall it later. That's one of the big changes, I think, for folks is that change in conversation flow, losing words just more easily, forgetting names on a more regular basis. I think names can be difficult for a lot of us. But this is on a more regular basis that it's impacting their daily life. He was a writer, he was a journalist. Losing his words very much impacted his life.
I'm like an overachiever and when you're unable to deliver or you're not performing at the same pace that you once did before, that's frustrating. It's frustrating to not know where you place things. It's frustrating to not be able to explain to someone the problems that you're having. You can't articulate it in a way. It's frustrating to read something and you forgot what you read. It's frustrating to continuously have to change your password and you just changed it last week and you're constantly doing the same thing over and over again.
Very common to hear those frustrations as well from those in those early stages about just having to redo things a lot. You'll see a lot of people have memory aids with them. So I know I've worked with a gentleman who always had the pocket t-shirts and he would just keep a little notebook in there and he would write down everything during interactions because that was his memory aid tool. And so they become very, very creative in how to help with that piece of their dementia and especially the short-term memory loss and moving forward with that. This last gentleman is one that is living with Lewy body dementia.
I think the thing that surprises me the most about my dementia is that it is progressive, and I'm finding that I'm forgetting more. And they do memory tests for me all the time at the doctor's, and so that becomes a little disconcerting at times to see my cognitive impairment continue to decline. But again, I really have hope. I don't live really in the future. I can't live in the future. I can't worry about what the future is going to bring. I have to live for today.
Very common sentiments that we often hear from folks, especially in those early stages where they know kind of what might be in their future, but not know. And so they really live in that moment of living in today. And we have a wonderful spot on our website called Living Well. And so there's some wellness tips around that for people living with dementia. We have a brand new app for those living. Our early stage advisory group put together a smartphone app called MyAlzJourney. So I encourage you to take a look at it. If you should be in your Apple Store, your Google Play Store. If you have a smartphone, it's called MyAlzJourney, ALZ Journey, and it's just a really great tool for those who have been recently diagnosed or maybe just have some concerns of their own, or they may know someone, and you can certainly download that app, and it has all of the classes and all of the resources kind of at your fingertips. So a really great tool for that. It was just developed all because of our early stage advisory group. All right, so we've talked about Alzheimer's disease as a continuum. And so this is a little snippet of what that continuum looks like. The teal area, which we call the asymptomatic area, is where we know from research that the plaques and tangles can actually be forming. So the biological changes can actually be happening in the brain up to 20 years prior to showing symptoms. So that means that we're looking at some changes, biological changes that could be happening in our 30s, 40s, 50s, somewhere in that range area, but could be up to 20 years prior to even showing symptoms. So this is where we call it the asymptomatic phase. As we move to the right, that gold section is mild cognitive impairment, or MCI, you might hear it as, due to Alzheimer's disease. This is an early stage of cognitive ability loss. Mild cognitive impairment is not a dementia diagnosis. They may say that it is due to Alzheimer's disease, and so they may move forward into that dementia diagnosis. In order to get a dementia diagnosis, we need 2 areas of cognitive features to have a decline. So that could be memory loss and difficulties with planning and organizing. It could be multiple things that in areas. With mild cognitive impairment, we typically are only seeing one area of cognitive changes. And so this is why it's not necessarily dementia, but we want to make sure that we keep track of those individuals and in terms of placement, in terms of screening and things like that with MCI, because it is a significant risk factor for developing into dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. So we're keeping track of those folks with MCI, and if they do progress, we move into the mild, moderate, and severe. You may also hear this as early, middle, and late stage of Alzheimer's disease. Typically, you saw some of those videos of those early stage folks. They are, a lot of folks are in the community working still, volunteering, driving, very independent. They may just need some supports in their memory loss, or they may need some supports in other ways around, we may see some changes in driving. So this is where we might see some of those things start to happen. You may see some changes in their vision. You may see some changes in their communication, confusion, all those kinds of pieces. Typically, these are involving symptoms that are starting to interfere with some daily activities. So especially with memory loss, this is where we might see folks start to miss appointments, or mismanagement of their medications, or paying their bills double in 2 times that month, or not paying their bills at all because they forgot to. So we start to see some of those early changes. I think in one of the videos, someone mentioned math becomes difficult. Figuring out tips, so figuring out things that were very familiar. If they were one that balanced their checkbooks and they're now struggling with that. If they were one that were really good cooks and loved following new recipes, and they're having a challenge following recipes, or even putting together a grocery list, things like that. Things that are starting to interfere with their daily activities. As folks move into that moderate stage, and unfortunately, there's no black and white line that says, hey, you're moving from that early to middle stage. It's really kind of basic symptomatic that we might see, and it's really what, for folks moving from early to middle stage, what happens is that the changes that they were seeing in the early stage just become more. We see that more frequently. They start to interfere with many daily activities versus some of our daily activities. We see those more significant changes. We may see some people that need some supports in terms of reminders or communication changes. I would say communication changes are probably the biggest piece. In this continuum, if someone's living with dementia due to Alzheimer's disease, the bulk of their time on the journey is going to be in these moderate to middle stages. So we're going to see that people sit in this stage for a period of time. One of the things that I think about personally when folks are moving from that early stage to the middle stage is in those early stages, individuals are usually pretty aware that changes are happening. There may be some denial because that's a human nature to deny something, especially when it's not wanted. But as we move into those middle stages, it almost seems like the individual doesn't necessarily is not aware or doesn't have the insight that something is changing in their brain and something's happening with them. So it's that almost that lack of insight. We often see some low motivation, low initiation from individuals. So if we ask someone, hey, would you like to go for a walk? Chances are 9 out of 10 times they're going to say no. Like if you want to ask someone, do you want to do this or do you want to do that? Most often we're going to hear no. And that's part of that planning and organizing. It's really easy to say no and not have to think about what to do next, because that could be a challenge. So the bulk of that time, again, is in that moderate stage. And then as folks move into that later stage or severe stage, this is where folks were probably getting 24/7 care, either in their home or in a memory care unit or something like that. These are folks who are needing that constant supervision. They may need support in grooming, getting dressed, toileting, bathing, some of those daily activities. So this is where we are going to be seeing folks needing support on that regular basis. And certainly for supervision, for safety reasons, we'll always have someone near them. So this is kind of the continuing of that. Again, when we hit those later stages, that's again when it's hitting that brainstem. So we're going to see some more of those biological features change too, and just those vital organ changes as well. Just a little recap again of some of our staging process. And so we just want to jump into some of the FDA-approved treatments for this. And really exciting, there's a website down here. If you want more information, please go to that because it is ever changing right now with research. So you all may be familiar with the medications that came out in the 2000s, the early 2000s, around Aricept or Donenzepam, Razidine, Exelon, which was a patch form, Namenda, Namzaric. Those were all medications that were really meant to and developed to treat symptoms, such as memory loss and confusion. They were known as treating the symptoms, but they were not touching the biology or the disease itself. So they weren't slowing the progression. They were helping to help those symptoms of the disease process. So a few years ago now, the FDA approved a medication called Aduhelm or aducanumab. And this was the very first one that came out, and it was very historical when it came out, that really treated the biology, the anti-amyloid beta protein. And so these, we now have two others, and actually Aduhelm or aducanumab has kind of moved to the back burner because we have some more effective ones. I think the most commonly prescribed one now is lecanemab or Leqembi is this other name. And these are intravenous drugs. So folks go in about every 2 weeks for these medications. For about 18 months they are on. They are only FDA approved for individuals in the early stage because their goal is to leave people with their cognitive value as high as they can. And instead of a gradual decline of their cognitive features, we're going to have even less of a decline for a longer period of time. So the goal is to keep them in those earliest stages for a significant amount of time so they have more time with their friends and families and they have more time at that stage. So research is good. We've got a third one out called donanemab. I don't hear that one as prescribed, I think right now, as I do Leqembi. We do have quite a few folks on our early stage committee who are board that are taking on the medications. And so there's still a lot. This just capped a few years ago. So we're still doing a lot of longitudinal studies and effectiveness and things like that. There are some side effects, as every medication does. And one of the significant side effects for these medications are brain bleeds. And so we want to make sure that these patients are heavily followed after. They go in quite often for MRIs to make sure that there's no bleeding in the brain internally. And they are followed up on a very regular basis with their providers. So again, this is an ever-changing part of our field. Really exciting though that we have some of these treatments out that are now available for those folks in the early stages. It also lends to that we really need to figure out a best practice too, and we have some best practices around early detection because again, these are only FDA approved in those early stages. So if we have folks who are getting diagnosed later into the middle to stages, this medication would not be effective for them, and they would be screened out for this medication. So if questions, certainly talk to healthcare providers. There's a challenge of getting the medications as well. There aren't not every clinic is able to provide this at this time. And so certainly we want to take into account accessibility and where it can be administered as well. All right. Lots happening in the research world. So I'm not going to go through this just for the instance of time, but just want to highlight the Alzheimer's Association International Conference that happened last month in Toronto. I'm sure you may have seen some of the media that came out after that. There's a lot of information that came out, especially around the US Pointer study. The US Pointer study is a study that has been done for the last few years around how to reduce risk factors for developing Alzheimer's disease, including living with the MIND diet, which is a very similar diet to the Mediterranean diet or the DASH diet. Mayo Clinic kind of coined the MIND diet, M-I-N-D diet, and looking at structured physical activity and pieces like that. So I encourage you to go onto our website and look at the US Pointer study results, because that is those will go through the best ways to reduce your risk factors for developing dementia and Alzheimer's disease. We also have a free clinical trial study matching service called Trial Match. So you can call our helpline which I'll give you that information in a minute, or you can go onto the website at alz.org/trial match, fill out a very short health history, and you can also join us in research to help find a cure and find other treatments and other methods along the way. So I just want to take a few minutes here, a minute here to just talk about our resources. So we are a nationwide organization. We have chapters throughout, usually they're about every state, but we share our chapter locally is Minnesota-North Dakota. So we have our North Dakota friends with us as well. Our mission at the Alzheimer's Association is to lead the way to end Alzheimer's and all other dementia. And we do this by accelerating global research, driving risk reduction and early detection, and maximizing quality care and support. At the last AAIC, or the Alzheimer's Association International Conference in Toronto, I think we had over 50 different countries represented in research coming together to talk about not just Alzheimer's disease, all the types of dementias out there. And certainly all of us at the Alzheimer's Association are hoping to work ourselves out of a job by creating a world without Alzheimer's and other dementia. I think one of our most fantastic resources is that first one, our 24/7 helpline. We are available 24/7, 365 days a year. So if you have a question, a concern at 3 in the morning, give us a call. This is available in over 200 languages. We also, at this number, have master level clinicians to talk to you about care consultation. If you're struggling as a caregiver or struggling living with dementia and want to have more information, please give them a call. They are available to provide a care consultation over the phone anytime as well. We have a wealth of online resources, especially caregiver resources. So please go on to alz.org. We have a tab just for caregivers to take a look, from virtual support groups to in-person support groups, education. All of our classes are available online. All of our programs and services are free of charge. We do not charge or want barriers there for folks that are caring for someone or living with dementia or have some kind of impact on there. If you're looking for a class virtually or in person, you can take a look at our community resource finder, which is at alz.org/CRF. That's where we list all of our resources, including our early stage resources, support groups, and education programs. We're always looking for folks to join us. I know I'm really excited. The Grand Marais will have their walk again this year, and so the October 11th will be the date up there. I'm not sure, Christy, if you have forms there for folks to register if they want to. I'll let you all figure that part out in the room, but you're certainly welcome to join us. It'll be a great day. Hopefully no rain this year. So looking forward to that. We also have our Twin Ports in Duluth. We have our Walk to End Alzheimer's on September 20th, so you're welcome to join us for that as well. We have over 17 walks in our chapter, so you can certainly go on to the website and see where a walk is located if you have friends or families in other areas of the state or country as well. The walk is our largest fundraiser, and that is why we are able to provide services for free of charge, is because of amazing donors and volunteers that we have. We are definitely a volunteer-led organization. There's very few staff actually, but we are, I think, with support groups. I manage all of our support groups in the state of Minnesota, and I have over 100 volunteer facilitators who are just the most passionate, caring individuals that you could possibly work with. So if you are looking for an opportunity, we are always looking for volunteers, for community educators who do things like this, and support groups, things like that. So happy to have you join us on those things as well. And think that's it. So I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, and I would let everybody know that I need to leave that you can do so. Otherwise, we'd happy to have you stay longer so we can do questions. We've been grateful to have you here today. It's been a good learning opportunity for all of us. One thing I want to note before some of you might leave, that October 3rd is going to be the date of the Cook County Higher Education fundraiser. That's going to be down at Johnson Heritage Post. And that is going to be an opportunity to listen to Dr. Karen Helbich-Lehman do a presentation on the English royal history as usual. It's a fun night. But I want to turn it back over to Jenna. Any questions you might have? If you want to put it in the chat if you're online, or unmute yourself, and those in person, just raise your hand and say what you want to say. Go ahead.
What is the website again to get this?
Yep, I have all of that on there. When you see the recording, all the links are included, and Christy will send those all out.
What recording?
We recorded this whole session.
Oh, so how do you get a hold of that?
It's always on our website after the events.
On whose website?
CCHE's.
Thank you.
Yes. Go ahead.
I have a question. How is the distinction made? Here you talk about MCI due to Alzheimer's disease versus MCI that is not due to, or may not be, or is not defined as what. How are these diagnoses made?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Primarily from my understanding, and I'm not a medical provider, is that they're going to be looking at symptomatic pieces. And so typically for folks with MCI, they're not showing areas of deficit except in one area, typically short-term memory loss. So they have all the other cognitive values are, in place and doing well, but they're struggling with memory loss, short-term memory loss, things like that. So they're going to look at what is happening with that individual. They're going to look at their family history. They're going to look at, do they have other risk factors like cardiovascular issues or diabetes, or maybe looking at any other high blood pressure, high cholesterol, heart conditions, things like that. They're going to be looking at. And they're going to try to figure out, is this due to Alzheimer's disease? Now, if they see that person with MCI bump for, kind of move forward with their progression in terms of symptoms, that's where they're going to take a look and see that, this is due to Alzheimer's disease. So they're kind of making their best guess at that point in terms of just symptoms and family history and some of those other pieces that might be around their medical exams. They may take a MRI, and an MRI may show some changes in their brain in terms of just atrophy or shrinkage of the brain. And they're going to particularly look at that hippocampus area. So maybe they're not showing all the symptoms yet. Maybe they're really early in that process. And so they may just get an MCI. Not everyone who has MCI will progress. I've known some folks who have been diagnosed with MCI and have lived with just the symptom of short-term memory loss for many years and never progressed past that. So it varies for everybody, and it's going to be kind of a very gray line for some folks too.
Okay, my question comes from that slide, Alzheimer's disease continuum.
Mm-hmm.
And for asymptomatic, it says biological changes in the brain. And I'm wondering, can these be like diagnosed or seen or?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the biological changes are those plaques and tangles. And so the amyloid beta protein, which is what causes the plaques, and the tau protein, which is the tangles, can be seen. However, it's usually through a PET scan. And PET scans aren't typically done quite often. We see PET scans done a lot when people go into clinical trials. Most of the research from this has come from folks who have been autopsied as well, so after death. So, I don't have a great answer for that in terms of do we know? What is also exciting, and this probably is the best way that we can see, is that there is now a FDA-approved blood test that we can do. Not all clinics are doing it quite yet. But there is a blood test now that can biomarker to see the amyloid in our blood. So they can do a blood test now for amyloid protein in our blood, and that can shed some imaging around that piece, because then we can see that there is previously to this blood draw, the only other way besides a PET scan that we could see know if we had an elevated level of amyloid in our body was through cerebral spinal fluid, so spinal taps. Nobody wants to do a spinal tap, not a very invasive process. So we drew away from that. So more to come on the blood test. It is right now FDA approved. I don't know, quite honestly, which clinics are doing it right now. I think there's still some question around what insurance companies are covering this test at this point. But it is out there and it is very new. So that's another big change in the research world and big change for early detection too, because that kind of jumps into that asymptomatic. Are we going to be able to know for those folks who may have an elevated amyloid level in their bodies?
Does your association provide resources for families that may seek a conservatorship or a guardian, and at the same time also recognizing the rights of the person suffering Alzheimer's?
Yeah, so typically we would refer out to an elder law attorney for those resources. So again, in your area, that's one thing you could find on that community resource finder, which is just alz.org/CRF. You can look up community resources there as well. So if you look, I believe it's called community resources, put in your zip code and you can choose elder law attorneys, and that would pull up for you for those in those areas. But for those conservatorship, guardianship, we would refer out to elder law attorney for those pieces.
Thank you.
Right on. You had said that there were medications that work for people that were in the early stages of Alzheimer's. Is there anything that works for people in moderate stages?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
Is there any medications that work for people that are in the moderate stages?
Moderate. So that's where we're going to see folks, those earlier classes of medications like the Ariceps, the Namendas, the Namzarics, those are going to be the ones that are going to be treating those symptomatic base. So they're going to be looking at, can we help this individual with the memory loss or confusion or some of those agitation or anxiety behaviors? The Alzheimer's Association for especially for any kind of those behavior kind of changes. Behavior is just a form of communication for these individuals. And so we highly suggest to try non-pharmacological interventions first. So are we able to have some different ways to communicate with these individuals or set up the environment for them before putting them on any anti-anxiety medications or anything like that? But sometimes there are some individuals that do are supported by those medications. It's something certainly to talk to your providers about because they also can increase fall risks and things like that. So we want to make sure safety is taken into consideration. For the typically those medications though again would be like those Ariceps and Namendas and Exelons and those kind of class of medications that came out earlier than the current ones that are out, and they're still heavily prescribed for those individuals who are not eligible for these newer medications.
One more question in the back.
We're kind of continually bombarded with all these ideas to get more exercise, improve our diet, do puzzles, all those things. Other than just improving our general health, is there any evidence that they make any difference for dementia and Alzheimer's?
Yeah, actually, so the pointer study, the US pointer study that we just got the results back from, they actually show some significant changes in people's cognitive health to do some of those things. So what we always say is what's good for your heart is good for your brain. 25% of the blood pumped from your brain or your heart goes to your brain. It's a huge portion. And so if we can't get the blood flow up there and the oxygen up there, that's the challenge, right? So that's where we start looking at vascular dementia, risk factors for other things. So it that old testimony that we always hear, exercise more, it's physical exercise, and it's also conditioning and weight training. So the control group of this study were doing some very specific things, and they actually were able to see cognitive changes for up to a few years for these individuals where it was delayed and or even I wouldn't say reverse, but just delayed on the onset, reduced of those risk factors of doing that. So I would really encourage you to go on to our website and take a look at the US Pointer study because you can see all of the information on there. Besides diet and exercise, I think it's really, really important to also keep in mind of around socialization and keeping together and continued learning. So the more that you can challenge your brain will build neurons from how we challenge. So if you're already doing Sudoku or word finds or computer games, things like that, fantastic. Keep doing them if you like to do them, but try something new too. Try something new hobby. You guys have a wonderful folk school up there. Try something new that you've never done before. Try learning a new instrument, whatever that might be. Even taking a different way home can challenge your brain. So the more we can challenge our brain and not let it just kind of sit there and be on autopilot, which we often do. I know I'm certainly guilty of that. The better we can build our brain muscles too.
Well, thank you so much, Jenna. One more question, one last one.
She just mentioned that study.
Yep.
Read the study, I don't know the name.
Yep, and again, the notes.
Yeah, and I will put it, I always send out, do you do email?
Yeah.
Okay, I always send out a, after class email to people, and I'll make sure that the link to that study is also in that email.
Yeah.
So you won't even have to go anywhere else. It will be in that email for you guys.
Thank you.
Cause yeah, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna.
Yeah, of course. Thank you all.
Something's right here, and best wishes on your exciting new move, and we
Thank
wish
you.
you all the best in that. Thanks again to all of you for coming.